Yeah. Everyone's important. Yeah. All right, thanks, eh? Will it work? I mean, you've tested. You've tested.
We're playing music. We're playing music and the slideshow into the live stream.
Okay. Public consumption. Okay. Cool. Yeah. Cool. And then you show when you want this Santana song.
Oh, don't let me fall over. Do you know people here? Do you know people here? Obviously, we've got John Graham there. Do you know John Graham? He's in people like John. Come.
You're in the road that I used to go through to Laurie.
Jacket, big guy, big guy. That's Graham Wilson. John Graham.
John Graham.
This is Rudo Boca.
Rudo, nice to meet you, Rudo.
Rudo's been Eddie's partner and he's just such a wonderful support.
Well, I'm looking forward to your speech in service.
I don't know respect.
Sorry to put pressure on you. No pressure. No pressure.
But John is a banking guru.
Oh, no. More guru than banking.
Joe, Mum wants my phone.
We got to go to a nice one. Nice.
Oh, do you want? Oh, shit, we could have printed it out.
Yeah, I had a disaster.
No, I went to, you must sit in the front, I'll go to the back. No, you must get a seat.
So, Joe, you sitting there, are you?
I'm going to sit here and then, yeah. I mean, I don't need to, but it's just so awkward getting up and down.
Oh, no, definitely. Yeah. One's good, two is too many. Was it an early one or a late one? Oh my gosh, everyone will hear us. Sorry.
I'm so busy talking.
Move it around.
No, stay where you are.
But you can move this chair.
But I'll take this chair forward. That's okay. It's the right front. It's the right front part. For how long you got to speak? Eh?
Months.
Sorry? 14.
Yeah. So yours is that. But you're more succinct.
Rubbish.
Joseph, would you like me to play some music?
Yeah. Play some music.
So do the Santana thing now.
Where do we stand? Yeah, start with
I think that was
you can go in circle, can't you?
the request. I was putting on a loop, yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, great.
So council beings. Perfect. Listen. I'm glad you're speaking at the end because I'll be sobbing.
Do not stand at my grave and weep. I am not there. I do not sleep. I am 1,000 winds that blow. I am the diamond glints in snow. I am the sun on ripened grain. I am the gentle autumn rain. When you awaken in the morning's hush, I am the swift uplifting rush of quiet birds in circling flight. I am the soft starshine at night. Do not stand at my grave and cry. I am not there. I did not die.
Today we celebrate the remarkable life of Eddie Rous, a wonderful and true husband, an adoring and proud father, a devoted brother and son, a committed and loyal friend, one who enriched all people who met him. Since he passed away, I have been comforted by so many people. Some I had met and many I had not. They all called him friend. His empathy was always evident. After Ed passed, we went back to the hospital to collect his things. There, one of the nurses, a complete stranger to me, came up to us to offer her heartfelt condolences and told us of a time Eddie had helped her very ill father to get to hospital when they had no means of transport. Not only did he collect them from their home, but he later returned to transport the family back again. He was always so ready to help others and did this quietly, with no need to draw attention to himself. Thank you, my darling Rousey, for choosing me to be your wife. I knew from the moment I met you that we were destined to be together. Of course, he was rather gorgeous, wasn't he? My soulmate and my best friend. We had such fun, and what an interesting and full life we had, and never a dull moment. And I know we should be together again, but till then I carry you in my heart. I am happy that you're at peace. Eddie had no fear of death, but more of the pain he knew he would leave behind. But M said Liz and I are strong because of you, and you have no need of concern for us. I'm so fortunate that I have no regrets of loving words unspoken, nor cruel words uttered. I only remember you with a smile on my face and feel so privileged to have had our time together. Stay safe, my darling, in the arms of God, in whom we always believed. I'd like to read a tribute by John and Nikki Stevens, who sadly can't be with us today, but hopefully will be with us on live stream. They mentioned Ed's valuable contribution to the safari industry, which I feel coming from such icons of the safari and animal conservation world, it would be a fitting inclusion to today's tribute. I know Ed's canoeing will be talked about in his eulogies, and apologize if there's any repetition. Nikki and I met Eddie for the first time in the late 70s when we lived at Tishinga, headquarters of the Matusa Donna National Park, and Ed was exploring the shoreline with the idea of starting a commercial canoeing operation. We agreed the Zambezi River might be more doable, an idea which was not met with much enthusiasm by parks, but that was Eddie, a never say no, a pioneer with an adventurous and optimistic spirit. The rest is history, and as you all know, with Jane at his side, they went on to establish the first canoeing operation on the river, building a flourishing safari business. We particularly want to acknowledge Eddie's great contribution to those early days of tourism. Many followed, and at its peak there must have been a dozen or so canoeing operations on the Zambezi, probably more if you count both sides. But none did it with quite the same style and panache as Eddie and Jane's canoeing safari. After canoeing safaris, they went on to do so much more, including last year, a rather longer than expected stint in New Zealand. We are so thankful they had this wonderful family time with all those great memories together. We're thinking of you today, Lizzie, and all of you, Eddie's special family and friends, gathered to celebrate his wonderful but far too short a life. Goodbye to a fine gentleman and friend from your friends, Nikki and John Stevens. Finally, I'd like to thank everyone who has joined us today, either in person or on live stream. I want to say a special thank you for the overwhelming love and support I and my kids have been shown since Eddie died. The most beautiful messages, the visits, the flowers, the food, the booze, etc., you name it, we have received it. It has buoyed us up no end and made this terrible journey more thank you. And a very special thank you to Carrie and Graham, who've come all the way from Joburg to be with us today. They're such special friends, and I know Eddie would really appreciate it. Thank you.
A bit more. Okay, thanks. When I think of Eddie, there is always one aspect of his character that dominates all others. He was the most empathetic person I have ever known. If Eddie were to see you bang your shin, he would rub his own shin and grimace as though he felt every bit of your pain. Eddie knew when you were happy, he shared your joy. He knew when you were miserable, and he shared your sadness. He also knew when it was time to get drunk and listen to Chris Christopherson singing Sunday Morning Coming Down. Edmund Felix Rous was born on the 12th of October, 1954, the seventh of 10 siblings that survived adulthood. His start in life was a hazardous one. Not only was he born 2 months premature, but he emerged into the world with his umbilical cord wrapped around his neck. Eddie flirted with danger from the very start. In 1958, a few months before his 4th birthday, the Rous family moved to southern Rhodesia. Thus, it is easy to appreciate that most of his formative years were molded by this wonderful country, as indeed were mine. Things were made better for us by the fact that we lived with a large, happy family on a beautiful farm in Mvukwiz, where each day presented new and exciting adventures. While our parents were religious, they were by no means puritanical. They believed very much in the adage that a family that prays together stays together. Morning and evening prayers were a ritual that always ended with the litany, God bless Daddy, Mummy, Granny, Tella, Mikey, Lisa, Lizzie, Bessie, Eddie, Joe, Christopher, Kate. As the children, we used to race to see who could say that the fastest. I think I failed it. Mum, who had her own way of doing things, taught us all at home until we turned 10. While we did have domestic staff, she did not believe in nursemaids, and so one might imagine that she must have had her hands full bringing us up. The truth is that a large part of that responsibility fell to the older siblings, who had little compunction in enforcing the rules of the house. Thus, Sai was raised by Nina, Lizzie by Sai, and so on down. Eddie was definitely the individual most responsible for ensuring that I followed the rules and went to bed at the allotted hour, ensured that I did not put my elbows on the table at meal times, Georgia, that I did not bounce balls in the house or ragged after 6 o'clock. Though if there was any ragging, it was very likely that Eddie was at the heart of it. To me, he was a source of all knowledge, and to this day there are still things that I assume to be true because the 6-year-old Eddie assured me they were. Eddie fell in love with nature at a very early stage in his life at Kamusha, and Kamusha provided endless opportunities for him to explore its wonders. Mum had a magnificent kitchen garden in which she grew every vegetable conceivable, every fruit and vegetable conceivable. Following a Bible lesson one day, one which must have involved a miracle or two, Eddie complained to her that there were no more miracles these days. Mum responded, "Come with me." She marched him down to the garden where she prepared a small bed and planted some seeds. Every day she would take him there to have a look until one day the sprouts began to emerge. Clearly that little miracle had a huge impact on him, for he often repeated the story. Our parents gave us tremendous levels of freedom that would horrify modern society. To be fair, I'm pretty sure they horrified the society of Rhodesia in the 1960s. Running barefoot around the farm, careless of snakes and other creatures, was not uncommon in those days. But few people were given, as we were, access to guns, motorbikes, horses, and enough explosive chemicals to have shamed Saddam Hussein. Eddie was an enthusiastic hunter in his early days, and there is a spectacular photograph of him aged about 10, with a shotgun over one shoulder and a guinea-fowl in his spare hand. The smile on his face lingers from here to eternity. I vividly recall on one occasion the schoolroom when Mum was reading a history lesson to us. Eddie had spotted a duiker in the field in front of the house. He begged her to let him go and claim it for the pot, or more likely for biltong. Being the marvellous person she was, she consented, and off Eddie went to the gun cupboard for the 16-bore shotgun, while I fetched my trusty side knife. Out we went, and after some stealthy leopard crawling, Eddie was able to get in range and bag his first buck. Homeschooling at its finest. But it was not just hunting that Eddie enjoyed. He kept pets, including a red-winged starling called Nyoni, which delighted us all by flying up and biting our stuck-out tongues. Our tongues were stuck out, not our personalities. He also went through a period of keeping snakes. When it came to handling reptiles, Eddie was absolutely fearless. But this was probably because he made sure that somebody else did the handling. I remember poor Chrissy being persuaded to catch a night adder, which Eddie convinced him was harmless. Our life at Kamusha, as exciting and eventful it was enhanced by the wonderful friendship that was built with our neighbours, the Murphys, whose age corresponded so closely to ours. We bonded in brothers, and indeed Eddie, of course it was Eddie, convinced us that we should become blood brothers by slicing our wrists with razor blades and rubbing them together so that our blood mixed. Oh yeah. Explains a lot about the Murphys. The Ferguses, too, were our very dear friends, whose positive and, dare I say, civilizing influences on our lives will forever be cherished. Though I'm not entirely certain that Sandy and Mary were quite as enthusiastic about the reciprocal influences that we brought to the party. Together, these three large families comprise the bulk of the Catholic mafia of Mvukis, who to this day are still talked about in hushed tones. When Eddie was eventually sent to Hartman House in 1966 for the last year of prep school, it would be fair to say that he struggled quite considerably. So many aspects of the regime were totally alien to him, and he battled to find his place. And then one day something marvellous happened. Never having played any form of organised sport, Eddie was introduced to the game of rugby. Being a new boy, he was put in the 4th team for his year. Though unfamiliar with the rules, he had learnt there was one thing he could do, and that was to tackle the man with the ball. And that is just what he proceeded to do. The sportsmaster spotted his courage and tenacity. "Put that boy in the second 15," was soon followed by, "Put that boy in the first 15." Within a few weeks of being introduced to the game, Eddie had been awarded his tackling colours, and his credibility with his schoolmates had been established. Lest all of you think that Eddie was a saint, he most decidedly was not. He could at times be very wicked. Back in the days of UDI, the country suffered international sanctions, the most egregious of which, to our minds, was our lack of access to decent sweets. No more Roundtree's fruit gums or Cadbury Smarties. Not that our parents were ever particularly indulgent in that respect. The year after Mum died, we went on a road trip to South Africa. Dad was pretty hard up by this stage of his life, and so the prospect of pocket money was bleak. But somehow Eddie was able to extract a few rand out of him to spend on sweets, which he would share with the rest of us. Well, that is what he told Dad. What actually happened was that Eddie would take one sweet from the packet and say, "One for me," then take another one out and dangle it in front of us and then say, "One for the road," at which point he would throw it out of the window. Even I might have found it funny if it had happened only once, but several packets went away. By the end of it, only Eddie was laughing. He still found it funny 50 years later. Eddie left school after his O-levels. He spent a brief time living with Helena, our sister, and her housemates in Baines Avenue, where he was introduced to various university academics and other erudite young men, many of whom were endeavouring to court our lovely sister. This was an important time for Eddie, as he was able to debate matters with people who had no preconceived ideas about his academic ability. School had not been good for him, and this interlude gave him a huge amount of confidence. I do not suppose that anybody anywhere would ever consider Eddie to have been argumentative. But if they did, it was probably during this period of his life when he learned to be that way. But Eddie needed something to do, and so it was that he managed to get Helena to sign him into the army for his national service. He was still only 17. The war had not really got underway in 1972, and the dangers that Eddie faced were more a case of blue-on-blue action than enemy conflict, specifically an accident in which he was thrown from a military lorry over the cab into the road. His platoon mates thought the unconscious Eddie was a goner, and he was casevaced to hospital. In the end, all he lost was his front teeth. Many people have this vision of Eddie as some sort of Greek god who commanded the Zambezi as a Poseidon commanded the oceans. But there were other less macho Greeks in the mythical world. I'm thinking, of course, of Adonis. Well, even I will consider that Eddie was not bad looking. By the time he'd reached adolescence, we had become pretty insular, living on the farm, isolated from any civilizing influences of city life. We did occasionally make it to the Mbukwa's club for teenage dances, but I'm not sure that really counts. In any event, it was here that Eddie discovered a strange and intriguing species of human, i.e. girls. During his observation of these creatures, to whom he found himself strangely attracted, he learned that in order to achieve success, it was necessary to parade oneself in as flamboyant a plumage as possible. Not having access to the latest designs from Benetars or barbers, the enterprising Eddie raided our absent sisters' wardrobes and found bits of material, including some black velvet, which he had the farm tailor refashion into a shirt. This was accessorized with a lace hem of a petticoat, but served as a tie, much to the bemusement of his peers and the amusement of the chatelaines of Mbukwa's. I still recall the looks of Betty Chance and Libby Wood as Eddie arrived at the New Year party from 1970 to 71. His flirtation with the rag trade eventually landed him in a spot of bother. Having finished his national service, he needed to find a job. Following some guidance from a friend who thought she had the measure of him, she arranged a position for him with an acquaintance of hers, an interior designer in Johannesburg. Without further ado, Eddie stuck out his thumb and hitched a ride to the City of Gold. It soon became clear to this very disappointed new employer that Eddie was substantially more binary than he'd been led to believe. Eddie swiftly realized that it was time to ditch the velvet and lace. He left Joburg and headed to Cape Town, where he knew nobody, nor did he have any place to stay, let alone a job. After several days of bumming around, living off Pro Nutro until that ran out, Eddie passed out from hunger and exhaustion on Clifton Beach. He was nothing if not stylish. There he was rescued by a genuinely good Samaritan who found him a room and a house and got him some work. By the latter half of 1974, Dad had decided to return to England with the 3 youngest members of the family, who had not already left the country. Eddie thought he should come too. We arrived in London in December to be welcomed by a huge immediate and extended family. One of his first acts was to join Simon in the hijacking of an electric milk float outside our relative's house in Holland Park. All our embarrassed aunt could do was to wail at the milkman, "They're from Africa!" The milkman seemed quite satisfied with that explanation, and no more was said. Eddie and I both soon found jobs working in various factories while we determined what we would do with our newly liberated selves. Having spent a few weekends exploring London and the homes of some relatives, Eddie took off to Australia to join our eldest brother Michael and a cousin who ran what really amounted to being a debt collecting business, though Eddie preferred to say a private eye. Eddie had not yet turned 21. An adventure-filled 18 months in Australia that included touring New South Wales in an American muscle car was followed by a return to England, where Eddie learned about photography. And then it was back to this country, where he joined Basti as his partner in charge of security on the edge of the Zambezi Valley for a very hairy, but thankfully final year of the war and the birth of Zimbabwe. It was always very sad for me that although we subsequently spent a fantastic year working together at Canning Safaris, Eddie and I lived on separate continents for most of the next 30 years. It was so wonderful when he and Jane returned to Zimbabwe in 2015, or was it 2014? And I'm eternally grateful for the fact that we were able to see much of each other in the following years. He was my beloved brother and greatest friend. I shall miss him, but will take comfort from the fact that he was so happy to be back in this country and so excited about the future. He often told me that he'd had the best life imaginable and was utterly grateful for having been married to Jane and for the wonderful family that they raised together. Is it? Thanks. Okay. Cool. Who's next? Nina. Come on, Nina. Are you okay? Do you want a chair?
No, I'm all right. Well, this is quite scary. It's generally only in retrospect that one's able to look back and recognize the joys and privileges that shaped one. And only as the metaphorical structures, the pillars, the furniture that supported and created us is dismantled, do we realize through the shock of loss how lucky we were. And so it is with Eddie, whose name alone conjures a smile, a warmth, images of vital energy, head thrown back with mirth, leaning into the argument, persuading, confronting, always curious, always questioning the prevailing zeitgeist, frequently controversial, yet without malice, without bitterness, humor and enthusiasm seemingly his semi-permanent default setting, when here in Zimbabwe, his home in every sense of the word, with his beloved Janie by his side, and their children in close contact or proximity. How lucky we are, all of us here, to know him. On reflection, I'm sure I'm not alone in the feeling of being whisked off on a glorious magic carpet ride of memories. And as in his favorite Bob Seger song, it's a question of what to leave in and what to leave out. But one can try, so here we go. 3 large families, the Rouses, dozens of them. In very close proximity, the Murphys, many of them. The Ferkses, a paltry 5 of them, and comparatively bourgeois in their adherence to such mundanities as shoes, brushed hair, and theoretical parental bans from grain dryers and motorbikes. The race to reach the turnoff onto the Omeath Road on the way to Sunday morning mass in the village was surprisingly competitive. The Murphy Rouse clans approached from the west in a Peugeot 404 station wagon and VW Combi, while the Ferks in a throaty American Chevrolet came down the Omeath Road itself, travelling in a northerly direction. The Combi often pipped us to the post by the use of undeniably devious tactics, such as arriving early and waiting at the T-junction, camouflaged by long grass, with a lookout on the bonnet. When the Chevrolet engine was heard and then came into view, the Combi engine would rev up, the Rouse Combi engine, and swing dangerously into the road just before we got there. Eddie, Joe, Basti, Chris, and all hanging out the windows, waving victory signs, and blowing raspberries. Such machinations didn't work so well if the Murphy-mobile snuck up and overtook them as they waited, or indeed if the council had recently mowed the verges. I recall similar scenes in reaching the post-mass stop at the garage to get ice creams, and for a short and halcyon period, gingerbread men. Danish remembers that as children, they wondered what they would be were they an animal. With raised eyebrow and a sniff, Eddie was clear about this. Edmund meant bold and brave, while Felix meant cat. But which one? A lion was certainly bold and brave, a leopard was agile, and the cheetah was the fastest animal on earth, so he bagsied them all. There was no Google then, but its definition now of Edmund and Felix, wealth protector and happy or lucky, is not exactly as Ed would have it. But I'm with Danish on this one and prefer Eddie's definitions, because that's how he was, bold and brave, and lucky like a cat with 9 lives. He did also have extraordinarily quick reactions. As Mickey points out, the games and pursuits indulged in daily by the Rouse Murphy clans were not entirely safe. In fact, they would have had today's health and safety czars issuing warrants, running for cover, and having collective nervous breakdowns. For instance, there was Mickey and Eddie off fishing on Lizzie's bike, quite without brakes. Mickey on the back with stick rods and a bag of flying ants. Eddie on the pedals, gathering impressive momentum downhill, optimistically believing as the bike bucked and bounced, his arms apparently, according to Mickey, looking as though he were using a jackhammer, that their bare feet on the loose gravel would do the job. It didn't. Needless to say, the result was a ditch, settling dust, and that stomach-hurting laughter that comes from adrenaline, relief, and being vaguely in one piece. Then again, Basti and Eddie's gunpowder plot, whereby they manufactured the necessary from the contents of Elizabeth's garden shed. potassium nitrate, sulfur, and charcoal. And then, of course, a cannon fashioned from a piece of bent pipe with a drilled hose for the fuse, for which the inside of a .303 bullet perfectly served the purpose. On completion of the design and engineering phase, the pipe, stuffed with gunpowder, metal pieces, and bits of cloth, was propped on a brick and weighted with a handy stone. Eddie, with great panache, told everyone to stand back and lit the fuse. The cannon went off with a tremendous bang, and the metal shot did indeed come out the front, but the cannon itself shot backwards between their legs, luckily, like a rocket. Life was far too crammed with adventures to spend time on physics. There are simply too many anecdotes and escapades from Ealing and Kamusha, with Eddie as protagonist, instigator, and entertainer to recount here. Many involve Eddie's bizarre devotion to snakes, as mentioned by Joe, capturing pythons while pursued by mummy pythons, poisonous SKP snakes in the bedroom, the enlisting of Paul, for instance, to hand feed a frog to a poorly snake. The snake regained its appetite, the frog lived, the hand was painful. Eddie was pleased about the snake. And there was his alleged photographic memory when it came to his exploits with a shotgun or rifle. Danish and Mickey tell of an astonishing ability to recall in the minutest detail the intricacies of his shooting achievements. Never boring and somehow not entirely boastful, just making sure that they fully understood the pecking order in his inimitable way. Eddie's childhood chutzpah turned into a rather mesmerizing flamboyance, as I'm sure many of you know. While the Murphy boys, for example, disappeared through the French doors like ghosts in the night when inveigled to dance at Claudia's 21st, despite some very practical dance lessons from Lotzi beforehand, you just dry your back with a towel like this. Eddie, on his return from Cape Town, was teaching Zander and I the razzle, which involved shaking and whipping your head from side to side and up and down to Slade, Black Sabbath, and of course Jimi Hendrix. We were in awe, naturally, but got awfully stiff necks. Nicola says that whenever she hears Pink Floyd, to this day, she has an urge to lie on the floor, just as Eddie instructed her and Claudia and others to do the first time they listened to Dark Side of the Moon. To feel the vibrations while he talked them through step by step the genius of the music. He returned from Cape Town, Australia and England, I can't remember when or which, like a glamorous male Mary Poppins, bringing alive the big world out there and a tangible sense of excitement and fun. Joe Nama trading, Leonard Cohen, Dire Straits, velvet hats, elegant, bright-coloured shirts. We'd never seen the like in barbers. And competition, always competition. Tennis, timed runs up to the beacon of the copy and back, racing demon and bridge. He was of an age with Nicola and Claudia and had therefore closely grown up with them. But I often think now of his generosity and of spirit and inclusivity in always treating us, the younger ones, Zander, myself, Hugo, and I know Stephen and Rob also, as equals, as people who were genuinely interesting to him. How flattering that was. Of course, Basti, Eddie, and Joe were terribly good looking, and I earned a good deal of kudos through association. One friend of mine, who shall remain nameless, slept with Eddie's photo under her pillow. I wonder if she still has it. I must have nicked it from the album to take to school when I needed a resurgence of cool kid on the block affirmation. It always worked. We are so fortunate, the Ferkses, to have grown up with two families who became, over the years, extended family, the Murphys and the Rouses. Mum and Dad loved many of the Rouses as their own, particularly after Kate and Chrissy left. Basti, Eddie and Joe. Dad had enormous respect and affection for Eddie and often asked his opinion on an array of matters. Eddie and Jane came to his 80th and last birthday party, and I think it probably made Dad's day. Kate and Ella were my companions and friends. Eddie was my hero. He remains my hero, and I, along with so many, shall miss him horribly. The raised eyebrow, the sniff, the audacity, but most importantly, the kindness of him. And as Emma and Lizzie call it, his big baggy heart. Thank goodness we have them, and Jane, and Joe, who he adored, and all the others to love and to remember with.
Just turn this around here. Today, it's a great privilege for me to stand here and reflect on a man who over many years is a great friend to me and my family. The Rouse family have lost a husband, father, brother. Jane, Emma, and Joe are here today. Seb is in London, and Lizzie in New Zealand. There are many others, mainly in the UK, and I know how hard it is for you not to be here today. Our thoughts and prayers are with you. With Eddie's passing, we've all lost a special person. Much of this past month has been spent thinking about Ed. To me, he personified passion, integrity, energy, positivity, and warmth. You couldn't think of Ed without hearing that laugh. Remember the fun, the real zest and enjoyment of life that he had. He was also without malice, very forgiving of any slight or wrong he may have suffered. And as he used to say, and I can hear it so clearly, life's too short, boy. Like many of his talented family, Ed was often ahead of his time with his ability to identify new ideas. He was a dynamic entrepreneur, and anything he did was done with 100% commitment, enthusiasm, and courage. I first met Eddie in 1980 when he arrived at my office in Kibrit, where he approached me for the loan of some canoes. This tall, lanky, well-spoken youngster told me he wanted to paddle the Zambezi from Chirundu to the sea. What an amazing idea. And together we started to plan the trip. Unfortunately, at the last minute, I had to withdraw our participation. Eddie never let me forget this. Ed had identified the beauty and the grandeur of the Zambezi Valley. And just as Zimbabwe was opening up to tourism, he recognized the potential of the establishment of a canoeing company. He was determined. There were many months of frustration and anxiety as he battled to convince people, including the Parks Board, that his idea was a winner. At one stage, he even had to sell his precious photographic equipment to keep going. But with the steadfast and loving support of Jane, they finally succeeded. It was a special time for Eddie, as he learned that his application had been successful just 2 days before they were married. And so it began. Many of us across the world who have had the privilege of a trip down the Zambezi can all thank Eddie for his foresight and perseverance in being the pioneer and pathfinder of these wonderful river trips. They offered a unique and exciting new concept in tourism. Many others have since followed in his footsteps. As a caring and compassionate conservationist, Eddie would insist that any activity would leave no footprint, and each new group arriving would find a pristine camp to enjoy. Even though Eddie was enjoying living his dream life, he was also missing out on his family, time with Jane and Emma. Family came first for Ed, so it was decided that the company should be sold, and with these proceeds, Jane and Ed moved out to Rua, having bought Mocking-Chat. So many of us will remember the wonderful times and hospitality that we enjoyed there. Eddie had now time to embrace a new project. It didn't take long, because along with Mocking-Chat came a group of 4 ladies, weavers, who had 2 looms. This developed into calico fence and weavers. Within a short period, they were making all sizes of rugs, utilizing cotton waste from Zimbabwe spinners and weavers. We, still to this day, have grass rugs in our home. The cotton rug business was booming. Ed and Jane were forever innovating, designing and improving their product. It was truly a team effort. Before long, the carpets were being exported to South Africa. And I have a memory of Ed offering a gin and tonic to a passerby at the Rand Easter show for 300 Rand. And by the way, your rug was for free. These were his marketing skills. It was a truly halcyon period for all of us. Tennis, golf, holidays together, long animated dinner parties filled with fun and laughter where we put the world to right. We covered a multitude of subjects: politics, religion, and of course, we discuss the selfish gene. Perhaps the word discuss isn't right. Maybe argue, or perhaps even listen while one was harangued. But who will ever forget the selfish gene? Eddie was a mean tennis player, and when facing his rocket-like serve, the best defense was, at the right moment, to ask a question about the selfish gene. Job done, game, set, and match. With the success of the rug business, an opportunity to be a fundamental part of a new venture was offered to Eddie. This required both the sale of both the rug business and Mocking-Chat. He then entered into the t-shirt making business with new partners. However, the arrangements were not to his ultimate benefit, and within a couple of years, in the early 90s, the family had moved to the UK. It was tough on Ed, but he proudly spoke about his large, loving and supportive family. In particular, the endorsement he received from Lizzie and Bruce and from Kate and Anthony meant a great deal to him and Jane. And during this period, Ed turned his hand to many tasks, but always hankered after Zimbabwe. Jane told us she knew trouble was on the way when Eddie would wake up in the morning saying he could smell the dust of Africa. Regardless of where they were, we continued to have close contact with Jane and Ed, and for many family holidays together. After Africa, the next most loved country for Ed was Italy. Everything about Italy appealed to him. Food, the wine, the religion, the history, the people, the love of family. We have such special memories of exploring the northern parts of Italy. And no matter the circumstances, Ed was always willing to lend a hand. On one such occasion in Johannesburg, Ed and Brett Butler were staying with us. A mistaken reading of the departure time for Windhoek, where Rhett was meeting important clients, left him dashing for the airport with Steady Eddie as his wingman to assist and lend a hand. On his return, Ed regaled us with an animated description that only he could produce with arms and legs flying, of a hilarious account of what had happened. Late, and making matters worse, they had initially gone to the wrong terminal. They had to run the full length of Jan Smuts Airport, Eddie carrying every single item of Red's luggage, and as a result getting stuck in a lift, desperately trying to keep up with an unencumbered Red, whom he can distantly hear muttering, like the White Rabbit in Alice from Wonderland, I'm going to be late, I'm going to be late, I'm going to be late. Well, this is the story. Red missed his plane, and wow, did we laugh that night. In 2014, Jane and Ed finally moved back to Harare. Jane working for periods in the UK, and Ed turned his attention to a new venture, that of cheer production. He often spoke in glowing terms of his new partner, and with enthusiasm of the opportunities that were about to be realized. Ed knew his heart was not doing well. He nevertheless refused to allow this to slow him down, and continued full speed ahead, as was not one to indulge in self-pity. Let me share with you the last WhatsApp I received from Ed some 3 days before he died. Thanks, Gray. Thank God I'm not left-handed. I can still point my finger when I argue. I'm recovering well, and I should be in the trenches next week. Things are getting exciting. I'm so lucky to have such a tolerant wife. The amounts of times she's picked me up off the floor. Love to you guys, and look forward to our next skirmish over a good meal and a bottle or two of that stuff that makes you argue. Farewell, my friend. We'll all miss you.
Hello everyone. I'd like to share mixing, not necessarily mixing, but I'd like to start off in Shona. And at important gatherings, we say Pamsoroi. And Pamsoroi in English, a translation could also be excuse me, or pardon me, or all protocols observed. So, Pamsoroi. A great soul serves everyone all the time. A great soul never dies. It brings us together again and again. On November 24th, 2016, I was introduced to Edmund Felix Rous, courtesy of his brother Joe, whom I had also had the privilege of working and learning from the previous year whilst he was setting up my cash. In Eddie's first email to me, he wrote, "Dear Miss Boka," and I thought to myself, Miss, my name is Eddie Rous, Joe's brother. I look forward to meeting you at your convenience to discuss the cheer opportunity that I feel might be of interest to the small-scale farmers. I've been doing seasonal trials for over a year, and alongside an agricultural scientific paper from a previous study up north. Please feel free to call and email anytime. In his second email, after we met, he says, "Very nice to meet up with you, and thank you for agreeing to the lunch. I hope my enthusiasm for cheer was not overwhelming. I look forward to hearing from you." To say that he was enthusiastic is an understatement. I will fall short of saying he seemed obsessive or obsessed. But I was pleasantly surprised by his intense sensitivity of a new mother who was in tow with her 2-month-old to a formal business meeting. It was then that I learned that he was a recent new grandfather to Oscar, who by then was 3 months old. So he was seriously into babies, and that just placed me in a wonderful comfort zone. In our ensuing conversations, what always struck me was his entrepreneurial spirit. He would always impart wisdom that I could never have gained in the life and circles I was connected to, and I'm so grateful for this blessing. Into 2017, I could by then easily relate to phrases such as, I married well. You see, after Nathan Shamiharira, I had to marry her. Otherwise, canoeing safaris on the Zambezi River would never have been birthed. Many days could not pass by without him reminding me of the importance of value addition, and this was through the sentence, I was in the T-shirt business. He would talk of his experience in Australia as a private eye, and how important it was to scrutinize with benefit of doubt. After we resolved to start Chia Grower Zimbabwe, before long, we connected with Karim Farsoon, our first investor, and just like that, he committed to supporting us and purchasing all our chia. Despite our combined commitment and energies, we soon learned that it was not going to be a walk in the park. Oh my word, weren't we getting ourselves into trouble? In between numerous meetings and reality checks from Karim, and in particular Joe, we had to decide whether we were going to save the world or change it. I know he would speak daily to Henry Rudd for counsel and support to get us to the sensible point. His priceless relationships with family and friends, especially Benoit Legesse, allowed us to progress to the next stage of value addition. Eddie has built a team of 15 dedicated staff and has trained more than 4,000 chia growers in the last 4 years. Collaborations with Francois and Hannes Swan, Dr. Zoe Maroveke, Sidela, Foundations for Farming, TIMB, TRB, members of the CFU, John Lewis, Rob Hoy, Annie Jack from the Kentucky University, Mike Jack and Jane of Four Seasons, AgriSeeds and ZADT are just a few of the initial building blocks he connected us to get going. With our beginning as chia growers, as Zimbabwe's alternative crops platform, arrowheaded by chia, we are tasked with developing a range of plant-derived products, the origin of which are heavily tied to sustainable and regenerative agriculture. Zimbabwe is dangerously dependent on crops like tobacco, and the future needs a look at. Eddie has taken 2 years to convince Jerry Mudondo to take on the strategic role to ensure the R&D and product development, that the R&D and product development side of the company was structured and progressive. There was never a time that Eddie expressed fear or insecurity. When the COVID era began, I panicked, and all we had planned, and thought that all we had planned would fail. So many setbacks appeared in the 5 months that he was in New Zealand. However, he made more connections from New Zealand. I particularly recall this period as the cementing of trust for us. It was at this time that we had to move the seed cleaning plant from Mount Hampton. The company that had installed it wasn't able to because of the lockdown restrictions. But did Eddie fret? No. He talked me through it all the way, and we successfully relocated the plant just by him talking to me over the phone, a whole engineering feat over WhatsApp. This was all in between a beautiful wedding for his daughter and a special time with his family. That's just how he was, determined, calm, focused, and hopeful. I'm so pleased to share that Eddie has allowed his entrepreneurial spirit and vision to see the beginning of organic seed cleaning services, and his assistance in the planning of Bokafloors in its transition into an agro-innovation hub to accommodate operations from freeze drying to potato drying. The seed that was planted by Eddie has germinated. I can assure you that we will not give up. In honor of his legacy, CGZ will continue with your support. This is for Zimbabwe, and Eddie loved Zimbabwe so dearly. I will say again, as in the previous condolence message, he always communicated, always shared, always innovated. There was never a dead end and no hope lost. At CGZ, he has impacted all to carry themselves with stamina, honor, ethic, and standard. Every once in a while, God blesses us with a very special person, and our lives are changed forever. Eddie was that special person. Eddie has left a permanent imprint on our hearts of everyone who had the pleasure of knowing him. He will be greatly missed. The sacrifices were made, the school fees paid, and just as the puzzle is coming together, he has gone to watch over us from above. To the Rous clan, thank you for allowing him to be part of our lives. We are here for you and your family always. Prayers and love.
Where's he going? Red.
Seems like yesterday, but it was long ago. Jane, it was lovely, she was the queen of my night. There in the darkness with the radio playing low end, and the secrets that we shared, the mountains that we moved, caught like a wildfire out of control, till there was nothing left to burn and nothing left to prove. And I remember what she said to me, how she swore that it never would end. I remember how she held me oh so tight. Wish I didn't know now what I didn't know then. Against the wind, we were running against the wind. We were young and strong, we were running against the wind. And the years rolled slowly past, and I found myself alone, surrounded by strangers I thought were my friends. Found myself further and further from my home, and I guess I lost my way. There were oh so many roads. I was living to run and running to live, never worried about paying or even how much I owed. Moving 8 miles a minute for months at a time, breaking all of the rules that would bend. I began to find myself searching for shelter again and again.
Lord, make me an instrument of your peace. Where there is hatred, let me sow love. Where there is injury, pardon. Where there is doubt, faith. And where there is despair, hope. Where there is darkness, light. And where there is sadness, joy. O Divine Master, grant that I may not so much seek to be consoled as to console, to be understood as to understand, to be loved as to love. For it is in giving that we receive, it is in pardoning that we are pardoned, and it is in dying that we are born to eternal life. Amen.
Seems like
English man, who from the day on which he first began to ride abroad had followed chivalry, truth, honour, generousness and courtesy. He was of sovereign value in all eyes, and though so much distinguished, he was wise, and in his bearing as modest as a maid. He never yet boorish thing had said in all his life to any, come what might. He was a true, a perfect, gentle knight. Thank you all. Please join us for some drinks and some food. Thank you. And thank you for the production team. On y va.